I'm Reverend Roy Fry, the director of Service Ministries and the author of a book titled Getting Married in Illinois. In this Wedding Minute, we're going to take a look at professional wedding photographers, and we're going to be comparing one photographer to another. In a previous Wedding Minute, we talked about comparing apples to apples when searching for a legitimate wedding officiant. The Wedding Minute focused on the idea that selecting an officiant based on price alone could be a mistake that can't be undone. We suggested that the focus should be on value, not just price, and gathering information and asking questions could lead you to finding real value that exceeds your expectations for your wedding day. In this Wedding Minute, we continue comparing apples to apples by looking at wedding photography and how asking a photographer how much do you charge for your services may not be a very good indicator of the value that you are seeking for your wedding celebration. Remember the example of the two apples? One sold for $1 and the other sold for a bargain price of 75 cents. And because we were only targeting price, we chose the 75-cent apple. And as you may recall, that was a mistake, as the bargain apple was mushy, it was dry, we found it to be distasteful, while the $1 apple was crisp, had snap when you bit into it, and the apple was juicy and flavorful. The point is this: when shopping for apples, if you don't get it right the first time, you can always go back. You can go back to the store, you can go back to the fruit stand, you can get better value for your selection by making a trip back. However, with wedding professionals, you don't have the opportunity to do that. So to help us understand what questions, including that price question, that we should be asking photographers, I went to the studio of Scott Pfeiffer, a well-respected and talented wedding photographer. I asked Scott to share his thoughts on what questions we should be asking to find the best value when choosing a professional wedding photographer. So here's Scott.
Hello, my name is Scott Pfeiffer. My business is Photography by Scott Pfeiffer, which I've been doing for about 18 years now. I have really seen a big change in the wedding photography market. I would say probably the biggest change has been in the last 5 years. It used to be in the old days it was all about pictures and prints and things in houses, and now what's happened is it's all about social media, it's all about Facebook, it's all about taking a look at pictures and doing a little research before you come in and meet with the photographer. Now with that said, what's interesting is the one thing that hasn't changed over the 18 years I've been doing photography is what does it cost, what does it cost, and what does it cost? It seems that that's one of the biggest and most frequently asked questions. And it's interesting to me as it tells me a lot about a bride. If a bride asks that as the first question, what is the cost? I usually know they're not real serious. That usually tells me they're looking for just some sort of a bargain. And sadly, it probably means that the price is more important than the quality of the photography. In my case, I would usually tell people, yeah, cost is a variable you want to know about, but before you do that, one of the things I think you should do is find out a few other questions that you should ask a photographer to learn more about their business and how it might work with you on your special day. So as I look at wedding photography, I'm going to be honest, I think one of the most important things is experience. And what's happened with photography is you've seen a lot more photographers that aren't photographers try to do photography, which means that they're often coming to you and your wedding is the first wedding, the second wedding, or the third wedding. I usually say that wedding photography is only about 15% photography. It's probably 85% working with people, getting people where they need to be, understanding when the unity candle is going to be lit, understanding the time flow of the ceremony and how you need to make use of time after the ceremony. So to me, probably one of the most important things for wedding photography is experience. And I kiddingly say it's a lot like heart surgery. You don't want to be the first patient. You want to make sure that somebody who's photographing your wedding knows what they're doing and isn't testing things out, trying to learn with your wedding. Some other variables that I think are very important is, has the wedding photographer worked at that venue in the past? I don't think you want to get surprises And that's the kind of thing that can happen when a photographer isn't familiar with an environment. The other thing is most weddings are under strict timelines. You want a photographer who knows exactly where they're going to go when they get to that venue. We're going to head right over by the oak tree. We're going to head right over to the bridge. And you want somebody who knows what they're doing. So those, to me, are more important. Another thing I think that's important is the style. And that, with the new social media and that kind of thing, that's something you can figure out prior to actually meeting with the photographer. If you look at, for example, Facebook or Yelp, you can see postings, you can look at their website and kind of figure that out. But I still think it's a very good question to ask when you meet with the photographer, is what is their style? And does their style mesh with what you're after? Another thing that's important, I think, to ask a bride, or excuse me, for a bride and groom to ask a photographer is to find out the details about the wedding day. And when I say that, there are a lot of photographers who feel like it is their wedding day. And I personally believe that it's the bride and groom. It is their special day, not mine. And so I usually try to work with them. And you want to find out, is your photographer going to work with you? Is your photographer going to do things the way you want it done? And that's one of the very important questions, because some photographers have styles that they're going to try to tell you, this is how it's going to be done. And you don't want your wedding done the way somebody else wants it done. It's your wedding. Other questions I think that are really important is what is included. As you look at wedding photography, it can be complicated comparing what is, comparing wedding photographers across platforms. Some include albums, some don't, some make it an option. I think ultimately, and I use Google as an example, people go to Google to find what it is they want to find. And again, on your special day, I think you should find what it is that you want to find. And you ought to be able to sit down with the photographer and find out exactly what it is that you want. And you know, your package shouldn't include things that you don't need. I mean, to me, that's kind of just a sales pitch. Here's a few things, here's a couple other things, and eventually you look at your package is grown to a price that you can no longer afford. So it's very important to find out what is included. What am I getting with my wedding? What's covered? And are you paying for extra things that you don't need? And if you don't need them, is there any way that they can back that out of the price to be able to help you? Another thing that has become very, more so, I talked about photography changing. One of the things that's really happened is the brides are starting to see pictures on Pinterest and other websites and social media. And so it used to be that it was up to the photographer to create the pictures. Now what's happening is a lot of times brides are coming to me and saying, here are some of the pictures that I've seen that I would really like. And to me, that's neat. I have no problem with it, but you want to make sure that your photographer is going to work with you on the pictures that you want. I generally print them and bring them with me to the wedding. I show them the pictures and say, this is the one that we want. Okay, let's get this. Here's another one, and it prevents us from playing what I call picture charades. But it gives us a great opportunity to put together the wedding pictures that the bride actually wants, and that to me is very important. Again, it's the bride and groom's special day. Another thing that's very important, I find, is who is your photographer. You kind of want to make sure that you're dealing with somebody that you can work with. And to me, that's absolutely critical to the process. You're going to spend one of the most important days in your life with this person, and you really need to find out, can you stand this person? I mean, if you spend the whole day with them and you don't feel comfortable with them, it usually isn't going to go well. So make sure that you're looking at personalities. Make sure that you're meeting your photographer beforehand. One of the things I always try to do, I include engagement pictures with my wedding photography. And the reason for that is because I want to work out any kind of kinks. So if there's something, for example, the bride, as I'm taking pictures, doesn't like, I want that all figured out before the wedding day. We are not going to enter a wedding day as playing the guessing game of what does this bride, well, I should say bride and groom want, but usually it's the bride. So we want to get those things worked out. You want to meet your photographer. You want to know them. The other thing is, will your photographer honor special requests, for pictures? For example, I had a wedding the other day where the bride's mom had a longer list of pictures that she was requesting for family members, friends. Will they do table shots and all these kind of things? Some photographers will only take the pictures that they take, and that's all they'll do. And that's an important, very important element. You want to make sure that somebody is there for your special day, covering it the way that you want it to be covered. I would also suggest asking a photographer about backup equipment. I'll be honest, I've had a camera break as the bride was coming down the aisle. And I was kidding my professional photographer friends about how I felt stranded as that happened. And they asked me, what did you do? And I said, I grabbed my other camera from around my neck. And they said to me, wow, that's impressive that you had your camera around the neck. My second camera, I should say, around my neck. It was at that point that I realized I'm pretty serious about this, because when the bride comes down the aisle, there is no repeat of that. And so what I was able to do was just take the second camera from around my neck, pick it up, and start taking pictures of the bride without missing a beat. And that's what I call professionalism or experience, but making sure that if there is some sort of a mishap, there is backup equipment, there is something that's going to get the photographer through the day to make sure that your wedding is captured. One thing that very few bride and grooms will ask me is, when do we get our pictures? And usually if they ask me that, I know that they're pretty serious. And I would really encourage you that as you're looking at your wedding photographers, find out what is kind of their normal turnaround time for your wedding pictures. What I generally find is that most bride and grooms, they really want their pictures back, and they want them in a hurry. And you know, they want them to be good, but they want them back quickly because they want to show their family and friends. And so social media has taken us from what used to be almost like 3 months before you got your pictures to now, you know, people are posting pictures right away that evening. And so there are photographers who think it's perfectly fine to return those pictures to you in about six months. Some of them will even go as far as a year out. To me, that is simply unacceptable. I mean, they're your pictures. You want them quickly. I want to get them to you. So for me, a normal turnaround is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 weeks to get your pictures back so that you can start enjoying them. Style. That is a pretty important factor as you're dealing with a wedding photographer. You know, I kind of kiddingly say with photography, and especially I think here in the Chicago market and the suburban market, basically what I find is that people kind of sort of want it all. And if I can be honest, the parents want the posed pictures. Those are the things they expect. The pictures, say for example in the church, or the outdoor pictures that are really nice and that kind of thing. That's all stuff that's very important to get. It's the kind of stuff that goes on the walls and it goes in the albums. But what's happened is, thanks to the Facebook world that we're in now and social media, people also want the goofing around pictures. They want to have some silly stuff, you know, people dancing to the YMCA, people goofing around, you know. They don't mind if there's a beer in their hands and that kind of thing. But this is the part where I say to you, you want to make sure that your wedding photographer is willing to capture your wedding the way you want it. So if you want a heavy amount of posed pictures and that's your preference, you got to let the photographer know. If you want the goofy, the zany, and the wild, that's something you got to know as well. If you're after the photojournalistic look and you just want people to naturally do their thing and enjoy their day, again, you got to let your photographer know. And that's something you definitely want to make sure that you're on the same page. And to me, that's so much more important than, say, cost. You know, rarely does anybody get their pictures back and say, wow, these are really cheap. You know, I personally want people to say, wow, these are really great. Scott was a joy to work with, and he took care of my wedding the way I wanted it taken care of, and I highly recommend him. So another thing I think is important is asking your photographer if they have a picture list. You know, do they have kind of a routine that they usually go through to make sure that you have pictures? Will they honor your special requests is very, very important as well. But when it comes to a list of pictures, I have kind of a list that I go to, which is like the ladies getting ready before the ceremony, the guys getting ready before the ceremony, and then usually it's kind of a mix of the formal pictures of the ladies as they're now ready, dressed, and that kind of thing, and then switching camps over to the men. And then, you know, during the ceremony, do they know what's important? Are they willing to get your special memories? And most importantly, are there any add-ons that you have? Anything that you're doing in your ceremony that's going to be different? Different cultures, for example, have different moments. And it's very important that your photographer know what's going to be important in your wedding and your wedding ceremony. Are there any special guests? You know, Frank Sinatra showed up. Well, not the real Frank Sinatra, but some Frank Sinatra impersonators and Elvis impersonators, Tommy Hawk, Blues Brothers, that kind of thing. Let's see, hula dancers, fire dancers, all kinds of things. But if you have any of those special things, it's very important to know will your photographer honor those requests. And I think probably most importantly though is, does your photographer have a game plan heading into your wedding? In other words, does your photographer have a concept of what your wedding day should look like in advance of your wedding? One of the things that I think is important is you're hiring a photographer. So like when you get a haircut, I always say, do you go to the salon or do you go to the person who cuts your hair? And most of the time I feel like you're comfortable with the person who cuts your hair. That same logic and reasoning, I think, is applied to photography. In other words, the photographer, who is it going to be? I want to know who that person's going to be. Who's showing up to photograph my wedding? And I would tell a bride is you really got to know who that person is. And as you look at photography, there are studios that have a lot of photographers. They'll show you a lot of beautiful pictures, but the question is, who took those pictures? And is that your photographer, or is that not your photographer? Is that somebody else? So you got to look at meeting your photographer, seeing their work, and making sure that you're all on the same page as far as your day goes, so that you get the pictures that you want. And again, I'll say it again, this is really, a wedding really should be about you, and you're in the driver's seat. You're the customer, you're spending the money, you are entitled to ask questions. And I get people sometimes that are really shy about asking their questions, and I always tell them, there are no bad questions. Make sure that you ask them. But don't come back to cost as like it was the only variable as to making your decision. There are a lot of other variables. You need to evaluate all of those variables and put together the best option for you as the bride and groom. Another important variable with wedding photography is to ask who owns your wedding pictures when you're done. And that's something that a lot of bride and grooms don't understand. But the ownership rights of the pictures essentially means is when the wedding is over with, do you get the high resolution digital files? Are they yours to use as you see fit? Or are they the rights of the photographer and you'll have to buy every picture from them? And when I say that, not only do you have to buy your pictures from them, but your family and friends would also have to do that. So that's a very important factor, the ownership rights. And I'll use myself as an example. I didn't understand that. When I got married, it was 27 years ago. And what happened was we paid a little over $1,000 for the wedding photographer. We then paid $1,300 to get the pictures that we needed, the album and that kind of thing. So you end up getting hit with one cost and then you get hit with another cost later on. So it's a very important thing for you to figure out. And you also want to know, what are you paying for the pictures? So if you don't own the rights to the pictures, what is the photographer's charge to you and your family members for each of those pictures? That will add up in a real hurry. The other thing is if you don't own the rights to the pictures, you can't put them on Facebook, you can't put them on social media, and you'll have limited rights to be able to share them. Another thing that's important, and it really isn't a question, but I'm going to call it homework, and it's a question that you should ask yourself, is, do I want to work with this photographer? And by that I mean take a look at the reviews, take a look at what other people are saying about him. Other bride and grooms have used this photographer, and the ones that have, are they saying good things about the photographer, or are they saying that this photographer had issues? I don't think you want to have issues. And with what we have now in the evaluating systems with the Knot and Wedding Wire and Yelp and those kind of social media websites and that kind of thing, you're really able to get a review. And I'm not going to call it a question, but I'm going to call it homework that you should be asking to figure out about your photographer and if that's somebody that you want to work with.
If you would like to receive more wedding tips, subscribe to the ChicagoWedding.org YouTube channel or register through the contact page at ChicagoWedding.org. If you have a topic you would like to see presented here, please let us know through our contact page at ChicagoWedding.org or simply add your comment on the video blog. I would love to hear from you.